I'll make four comments as a preamble to my presentation. One is that it is complementary to the official presentation made by the Chinese delegation yesterday afternoon. Second, it provides my own insights from my extremely limited experience in China for about 3 years, and hence it has limitations inherently imposed by my lack of familiarity with the Chinese language, culture, and its vast and complicated education system. So, at best, I'm presenting this as a neo-literate, and at worst as a semi-literate, not by any means an expert. It represents, on my part, and also the education team in UNESCO Beijing office, which helped me to put this together, a sincere and humble attempt to understand and articulate the why and how of China's experience and undisputed success in achieving adult literacy in a very short historical span. And it draws upon my experience in 3 E9 countries, including India, Nigeria, and China. We heard yesterday the what, but we are trying to focus here on what we see at the house. And lastly, it is presented in a spirit of mutual learning that this conference presents within a framework of what Professor Bhola highlighted as South-South and North-South-South collaboration. Before I decided to present a snapshot of my longer paper, I was told that these days international conferences, some of them don't allow PowerPoint presentations. So I'm not being smart in making a PowerPoint presentation, but I think nevertheless, as a bureaucrat, I think I'm in a habit of leaving things on the record. So this is my attempt to encapsulate what we think is happening in China or has happened. Okay, so this is well known. I think this part of China is well known. Rapid economic growth, second largest economy in the world, biggest foreign exchange reserves. But the last bullet point is where I need to focus your attention. 500 million Chinese have been lifted out of absolute poverty and hunger in the last 30 or so years, which is 50% of Africa's population, to put it in perspective. And this is accompanied by, simultaneously, and I think this emphasizes the link between literacy and poverty eradication and economic growth. Doubling of life expectancy from 75 to 2000. Drastic reduction in infant mortality by about half. Significant improvement in maternal mortality. I'm not giving the figures, so I won't please statistical buffs, but it is all there in the Chinese presentation and my paper. Nearly universal 9-year compulsory schooling across regions, across all segments of the population. Dropout rates, and this is quite difficult to believe, is at a historical low of below 1%. Actually, it's 0.4% at the stage of junior secondary education. Adult illiteracy, under 5%. And this is a world success story with 4 million on average made literate per year. And the Global Monitoring Report highlights the fact that global literacy has increased dramatically because of Chinese success of making more than 100 million people literate in the last 2 decades. Average years of schooling gone up to 8.5, which is almost there with the 9-year objective, and gender parity achieved in schooling. And now we come to some of the hows. A policy of prevent first, and this is from the Chinese translation, so it may not be exactly what one might expect in English, but prevent first, that prevent illiteracy by ensuring that everybody has 9 years of compulsory satisfactory quality of education and that nobody drops out. Eradicate second, focus on the adult illiterates, of whom there are very few now, and therefore upgrade the literacy levels continuously of those who are neoliterates, and therefore they don't relapse into illiteracy. So it's a three-pronged approach, I think, which came through in the previous three presentations. You can't do literacy alone. You have to look at the three pillars that the Chinese have looked at, and they look at it as a right as well as an obligation to education. So individual citizens, I think we've heard a lot about rights here, but it's equally important in the Chinese way of thinking that every citizen has an obligation to be educated, and if they don't fulfill that obligation, they are not doing their duty as a responsible citizen. The two basics over the last 2 decades have been internalized and implemented in China. 9 years of compulsory education that is free, and elimination of illiteracy among young and middle-aged people, which means between the age of 15 and 50 years. So again, you see that the two pillars, in China, you will not find policy statements talking only about adult illiteracy or only about compulsory education. They would always talk about both in conjunction. And fourthly, the development of varied forms of adult education to suit the needs of the citizens, which are diverse, so receiving appropriate education in political, social, cultural, and productive terms. So I think that somebody asked yesterday this question, literacy for what? The incentive for literacy. One of the UNESCO colleagues who's had experience of 26 years working in China, she comes from Thailand, wrote a very nice essay about her perspectives. And she said, whoever she asked in China, why do you want to become literate? They said, because we want to be rich. Now, this might strike an odd tone, but becoming rich means coming out of poverty. So again, you see a very strong link between literacy and poverty eradication in the minds of the people who are beneficiaries. This is my attempt to summarize some of the factors which are responsible for this kind of success. A competent, highly competent and sophisticated and unified leadership down the line from top to the bottom, with consistency of policy and commitment, as well as pragmatism and flexibility to respond to emerging challenges, such as the movement of 200 to 250 million people from rural to urban areas, and a huge and growing aged population with 14% more than 65 years. And you see that they are adjusted to local realities. Another, I think, myth about China is that it is highly centralized. When you go there, you realize that actually it is highly decentralized. The policies provide you a framework, as Dr. Bhola was saying, in terms of operational and implementation issues. There is a great deal of flexibility and space, which sometimes work to the positive, but sometimes not. Policy sensitivity to prevailing conditions, a very pragmatic and progressive approach has been adopted, where you start with the developed regions in the coastal areas and move towards the more underdeveloped west, and therefore you would have different targets for different parts of the country, including flexibility within provinces and counties where necessary. It's a highly targeted approach to address development challenges along with literacy, and now having achieved a lot in the East, they are all, in a sense, going west. It is also a reflection of selective learning and adaptation, building on successful pilots and experiments. You don't find in China policy announcements that are made at the national level and then expected to be implemented in the rest of the country. What you find, and the great leader Deng Xiaoping put it, that you feel the stones while crossing the river. If the stones are prickly and unstable, you stop. If they are smooth and stable, you carry on. That is one of the policy and implementation strategy which has delivered the goods for them. Again, they started, like many post-revolutionary societies, including Cuba, Nicaragua, Tanzania, and so on, with literacy campaigns, but they have moved to sustained adult education programs. So it's taken away the ad hocism, the kind of temporary structures which you associate, the mobilization which flags with time. You now have permanent programs and permanent structures. And as I said, very strong emphasis on improving agriculture and industrial productivity and raising the people's living standards and incomes. You find a vast institutional network to serve all segments of society. I'll give a snapshot of that in rural and urban areas. And I think what is important is that they've recently integrated the Department of Adult Education with vocational education. So this integration with TVET is necessary for improving continuously the knowledge and skills of farmers as well as workers, the two pillars of the Communist Party, if you may say so. And then using ICTs, which have not been mentioned enough since yesterday, I think, and distance education for lifelong learning, particularly for people over 65 years, and differentiated strategies for diverse population groups, as was being mentioned by Professor Pola, different for women, different for ethnic minorities, different for different age groups, 15, 50 plus, and so on. You see the institutional framework, as I was saying, it's vast. You have literacy classes for illiterate population, of which, of course, there are very few now, but primary classes for illiterates using the existing infrastructure. And what you have is a kind of a parallel setup where at the level, the equivalency level of each school, which is 6 years, 9 years, and so on, you also have parallel adult schools for farmers and workers, and also institutions of higher learning dedicated to adults. And then they have also adapted the community college model of USA for 2-year community learning. Again, there is opportunity for self-learning and examinations to test yourself. And there are this whole range of schools in urban and rural areas looking after cultural and technical and vocational aspects. The one which I want to highlight, which I was most impressed by, is the case of the blind messieurs. They have established schools to train blind people for doing medical massages. And there are 96,000 of them in China, different places. You will see these boards there in Beijing, Shanghai, and other cities, all parts. Because they did some research and decided that this is a very dignified, respected profession, and that the blind, both men and women, bring a special touch to it. And that has now manifested in itself for special schools for blind messieurs, and you can see them practicing and experience how good they are. The other important part is that the enterprises, the state enterprises as well as the private enterprises, run schools for educating their workers and labor to continuously upgrade their skills for the jobs that they do, but also the jobs that they wish to do. And urban migrants are being educated at construction sites. In Guangzhou itself, I think there are 3,000 such schools in southern China. And there are, I found, even theaters and museums to make the migrants feel at home. And then, as I mentioned, there are rural distance education courses for rural people through a huge network of TV universities.
Professor Abhimanyu, you have 4 more minutes.
Okay. I've said most of what I say, but the rest can, as I say, remain on record. This is, again, we've talked about special classes for women and ethnic minorities. For ethnic minorities, the bilingual approach is being researched and applied. Governance, I think I will like to highlight the establishment of the inter-ministerial leading group on education. One of the banes of literacy is that there is not much of inter-ministry collaboration, and there is education ministries are handicapped in doing all of it themselves, and this is reflected down the line. State enterprises and private corporations, from the salary, they deduct 1.5 to 2.5% and invest it in the training of workers. Financing, I think a subject which has not been approached. National average is 1% of 1% of education budgets being invested in adult education. China is 2%. The recommended norm for all countries is 3%. They have a special fund at the national level for incentivizing provinces and counties. And as somebody said yesterday, there is accountability through your performance appraisals. And this is a practical approach, one of the practical approaches where you have different norms for rural and urban areas for learning characters, and these are all equivalent to different levels of numeracy and calculation. Volunteerism, 1 million students every year volunteer to work in the summer vacations for literacy, 1 million, and this is organized by the Communist Youth League. Other gongos which are actively involved are the All China Women's Federation, as well as the China Association for Science and Technology. Again, in China, you find a very tight fit between science and technology and adult literacy, also between policy and implementation. Here is a snapshot of what they are doing for citizens over 65 years. Research is linked to practical problems. If you see the last ABC, so now the research is focusing on the challenges. You might say, oh, it's all very hunky-dory, but they have recognized these challenges, so their concentration is on urban migrants, laid off enterprise workers because state-owned enterprises have been closed or merged, surplus rural labor for non-agricultural occupations, bilingual education for ethnic minorities, and education for the elderly above 50 years of age. These are the areas of research for the immediate future. The challenges reaching 54.6 million, mostly women and ethnic minorities who remain officially illiterate. Increasing state funding for literacy and adult education. I think that there is a declining trend, and Professor Bhola's words about how decentralization can actually hurt has been reported from some remote areas where there is a residue or even a recurrence of illiteracy, because the more backward the area, less capacity to be able to raise funds. Even if you have the authority, you don't have the resources and the level of development. So that is an area of concern and risk. Establishing equivalency programs, which are recognized across the board. And of course, to continuously refine national literacy standards to suit the changing needs of youths and adults, and if I may say so, the expectations of the rest of the world. Sisia, thank you.
Thank you.